Most of the time, we can go about our business in public without having to think too much about anyone else in a big city. But every now and then, you are confronted with a situation where you have to make a decision: do nothing or intervene. Now, a video has gone viral showing how people react when a couple start fighting in the street. And the hidden camera experiment shows a very different response depending on whether the man or the woman is the victim of abuse.
Yeah, and I'll try and see you on Thursday and then get the...
What do I do? What?
Just keep doing it. They're annoying.
What?
Too hard. Come here.
Get your hand off me.
Come here.
What?
Where were you?
I'm not talking to you about this. I'm not talking to you about this. Get your hand off me.
Who was there?
Get your hand off me.
Who was there? Tell me who was there.
People are looking at us.
I swear to God, Chris, I swear to God.
People are looking at us. Will you get your hand off me? Stop.
Shut up.
People are looking at us.
What's wrong with you?
Honestly, we're fine.
I'm grand, thanks.
Okay, because someone will call the police if you carry on doing that to someone.
Okay.
'Cause if I don't, someone else will.
Okay. It's perfectly fine.
You don't have to put up with that, honey.
Okay. Thank you.
My office is there. You're definitely all right.
Yeah, I am.
Problems just come knock.
I'm grand, thanks. What do I do? What? Do you ever listen to me?
Chrissy, stop. Just, you're crazy.
Like, I've been talking at you for the last 10 minutes and you haven't listened. You haven't gotten into what I've been saying to you. You're not even listening to me, that's what. Why do I push you like that? Because you won't on to me about any, you won't listen to me. Family.
I wasn't.
No, you can't be. No, you can't be. Don't try and walk away. Stop. Listen to me when I'm talking. Don't try and walk away from me. Stop it. What the shit? What the it? There's nothing. Don't give me that, okay? Pathetic. You're so pathetic.
The man behind that video is Mark Brooks, the chairman of the Mankind Initiative, and he joins us now from London. Mark, people seem entertained when the male was the victim of that clip. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's very saddening that in today's society, where any domestic abuse seems to be not taken seriously, and certainly one of the problems is for male victims is that society as a whole don't recognise that they are victims of domestic abuse in the way that society rightly does, where there is a female who is a victim. It was particularly saddening as well with so many younger people around the scene where this was being filmed, because younger people tend to be more likely to be a victim of domestic abuse than older people. It was particularly sad. Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary that we do have that gender differential when it comes to what, you know, in many ways amounts to the same violence. The clip received hundreds of comments online. Here are two of them. Firstly, I'm ashamed to admit that I probably would have reacted the same way. Definitely made me think twice. There's this one. 99% of men are stronger than their female partner. It's ridiculous to try and make equality work in every situation. Obviously, quite different points of view there, Mark. I mean, what are you trying to do with this video? What would you like to see come out of it? All we are asking and all we want to see is that everybody in our society views and recognises the fact that men are victims of domestic abuse too, and view them in the same way they rightly do a female victim.
Yes.
That's all we ask. It's not difficult, it's very simple. We just want to ensure that all victims are supported.
Indeed. Do you think there is any difference between the domestic abuse suffered by men and that suffered by women?
Generally speaking, no, there is no difference. It's about the perpetrator ensuring that they have full control over their partner, and there are some nuances with regard to the level of psychological control, the level of violence in some relationships between the genders, but generally speaking there is no difference. And that is the key thing that we should always think about. There is no difference whether you're a male victim or a female victim.
Yes, certainly. I think we would all agree with that. And, you know, it's violence itself which we must be seeking to address. Mark, it is a fascinating experiment. Well done for coming up with such a hard-hitting piece, if I can sadly put it that way. And thanks for joining us this morning. Here's Sam.
It happened in an instant. Some rubbing alcohol, a lighter, and absolute terror.
It was just extreme heat and flames, and it seemed like the whole house was on fire.
The house was not on fire, but Melvin McDaniel was. His arms, chest, and hands engulfed in flames. He battled to tear off his burning clothes.
I finally ripped them off, and I was standing in the kitchen naked. I could see my skin on parts of my shirt on the floor. I can see it smoldering.
See it and smell it. The putrid odor of burning human flesh.
The smell was awful.
And the aftermath was too. McDaniel spent more than a month in the hospital and suffered through 8 operations. He still carries around the scars, and it is a heavy burden. A daily reminder of the woman McDaniel says intentionally set him on fire, burning away his flesh, his ego, and his peace of mind. That woman was his girlfriend.
Was she trying to kill you?
I think so.
And if he's right, she would certainly not be the first. Each year in this country, 600 men are killed by their wives, girlfriends, or exes. You hear the statistics for female victims of domestic violence.
We know that every 15 seconds a woman is battered.
But how often is a man battered by a woman in the United States? Well, the number is the same, every 15 seconds. At least according to Richard Gellis. Gellis is considered one of the country's leading experts on domestic violence. He has made a career of talking to victims and perpetrators, and what he's discovered is that
the women are as likely to initiate the violence as the men.
And it might surprise you to know that Gellis says 1/4 of all domestic violence cases involve men who don't hit back. That's what the numbers say. In this room in Sacramento, California, you'll find the people who back them up.
Somebody was going to die in my house. I was ready to fight to the death over who didn't change the toilet paper roll.
These 3 women have all been locked up for violent behavior, usually against a husband or boyfriend. The women have also done time in an anger management class run by Claudia Diaz.
Do you think people would be surprised how many women come here?
Amazed. I think they would be surprised how many women engage in physical violence.
The Sacramento program is one of just a handful of anger management programs in the U.S. targeted toward women who abuse their male partners.
You think that can't nothing happen to you. I mean, you just can go through life and do it and hit and slap and punch.
And I thought it was really cool to be a tough guy.
Yeah,
oh, yeah.
Defend yourself.
So if there are men who are victims of domestic violence, it seems that there would be shelters to house those men. But we searched the whole country and found just one domestic violence shelter that accepts men. We found it here in the middle of the California desert. We can't show you the outside of the shelter because we want to protect the men, women, and children who stay here. We can show you the inside, places where those children can finally play without fear. Rick Stratton participates in the shelter's outreach program. His wife did time for 6 felonies, including stalking, abuse, and causing grave bodily harm. He says she broke his ribs, his jaw, and his confidence, and when doctors treated his injuries, he lied.
I'm getting 3 or 4 stitches in my jaw, and I'm telling them that I fell down and hit a TV.
Stratton says he knew a 180-pound tattooed guy would be laughed at if he asked for help.
There's 100,000 male victims in our society who, when they present themselves as victims, the best they can hope for is that they'll be taken seriously, but more often than not, they'll be laughed at or ridiculed. What do you mean? You let your wife hit you? Why would you let your wife hit you? Hit her back.
But Stratton swears he never did. He says he learned as a child over a game of Monopoly never to hit his sister, a lesson handed down by his father.
He told me one time, he said, you do that again and you'll pay for it. You don't hit girls.
A very different lesson from the one many little girls learned.
I was taught if any man ever says anything to me that's inappropriate, I get to slap him.
I can't think of anything bad enough.
And Hollywood teaches that lesson too.
the latitude that women get is more substantial. They have a greater free fire zone.
Some say even our nation's lawmakers have looked the other way. Back in 1994, Congress passed the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA. It's $1.6 billion tax dollars.
It's done a lot of very concrete things that will actually increase the physical safety of not just women, but all people who use those services.
People we talked with all agree that VAWA has done good things for women, but most say it has done little or nothing for men. One Justice Department official told us flat out, quote, "The program is designed to assist women." And take a look at this Justice Department document obtained by Fox 5. It acknowledges that for the purposes of VAWA, the department refers to, quote, "victims as women and perpetrators as men." Critics say that's un-American.
Clearly it's unconstitutional.
Congressman John Conyers sponsored the Violence Against Women Act.
I worry about constitutional issues, and this is not one of them.
National Organization for Women Executive Vice President Kim Gandy is one of VAWA's strongest advocates. She says the bill does not discriminate.
Most all of the provisions are quite gender neutral.
But if the language of the bill is gender neutral, why not make the name gender neutral?
What's in a name?
Maryland Congresswoman Connie Morella says that there is something in a name. She says the Violence Against Women Act is called that because more often than not, women are the victims of what used to be called a dirty little secret.
That secret really affected women far more than men. And women were contained within their little shell as a hostage.
She's right. Women are more likely to be victims. Morella admits they are perpetrators too. In fact, Richard Gellis says there are 2 million women in the U.S. who hit their male partners. Take out those who are emotionally provoked and those who hit in self-defense, and he says you're still left with 100,000 women who beat their male partners. Author Phil Cook says hardly anybody's talking about that.
There is, I believe, a deliberate effort to give out misinformation about domestic violence for political reasons.
Cook penned the only book ever written that focuses strictly on male victims of domestic violence. He's been speaking out, so has Barbara Ladine. Ladine works for a group called the Independent Women's Forum. She's a regular critic of some of VAWA's biggest supporters.
I think the average taxpayer would be appalled. Also because the average taxpayer has been beaten around the heads by the media and by the government to understand that this is a female problem done by males.
Lobbyists for men's organizations say the American taxpayer has bought into those negative stereotypes of men.
They stay after work, they have sex with their secretaries, they go to the bar with their buddies, they get drunk, they go out and have sex with the waitress, then they come home, beat the wives, and have sex with the children.
Back in the 1970s, as America fought a war in Vietnam, another battle, the one between couples, came into the spotlight here at home. Back then, people thought only men could be abusers. Claudia Diaz says that got women the help they needed.
And it was a great paradigm. It worked, it was effective, and it's not realistic.
Now, she and some others agree it's time for VAWA's supporters to make a change.
They like the spotlight to be on the women. The spotlight has been on the women for 20 years, and I have no problem with that in one sense because I want women to get help. But I think it's time to turn on the stage lights and see who else is on stage.
Researcher Richard Gellis says he's even had his life threatened by people who disagree with his conclusion that men are victims too.
How many death threats have you gotten?
10, 12.
Rick Stratton says that sort of active effort to hide information is dangerous.
I can't be an isolated incident. I can't be. And I know that there's something that's got to be done about it because the longer we stay quiet and we cover and we lie, the worse it's going to get. And we're going to be using body bags.
Counselors say not dealing with both sides of domestic violence means in the long run, kids suffer.
In the final analysis, it doesn't matter whether dad's hitting mom or mom's hitting dad, the children are watching and they're learning the wrong lesson.
The children learn to use violence in their homes, and they pick people who know that dance, and the violence just keeps going on and on and on.
On and on as children grow up and live in the shadow of their parents' mistakes.
When it comes to domestic violence, we've gotten only half the story.
Male victims of domestic violence have been systematically ignored and marginalized. Most people don't even think they exist. This has happened due to advocates in the media telling half the story and only half the story. The story that's been told focuses exclusively on female victims and leaves out men and boys, even though there's an abundance of evidence from both research and clinical data that men and boys comprise a significant portion of the victims of domestic violence. When we're told half the story, we're left with a distorted view. Just imagine if you were told the story of Cinderella, but the part about the glass slipper was omitted. You'd be left with a distorted picture of the story, right? That's exactly what has happened with domestic violence. Here's a fact sheet from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, one of the nation's oldest and largest domestic violence organizations, and the voice of the 50-state domestic violence coalitions that guide domestic violence policies and services in the U.S. It's meant to teach the public about domestic violence. Notice that it clearly states that there are 1.3 million female victims of domestic violence. It refers to a research study to back up this claim. Now, let's look at the research that they used. Sure enough, we can see there were 1.3 million female victims. But wait a minute. This study, the same one that's quoted in the above fact sheet, lists both male and female victims, and it shows that there were also 835,000 male victims of domestic violence. The fact sheet never told that part of the story. Why would they leave out such an important finding? Why not state that there were 1.3 million female victims and 835,000 male victims of domestic violence? Or even total the two and say there are over 2 million victims of domestic violence in the U.S. But somehow the male half of the story is never mentioned. We never see the glass slipper. Now, the NCADV is far from the only offender using this practice. Omitting male victims of domestic violence is very common. There are an estimated 600 sites on the internet that quote the same half of the story about 1.3 million females and then say nothing about the male half. I urge you to search the phrases and see for yourself. Male victims simply don't exist according to these sites. They quote only their preferred half of the research findings. Respected researcher Murray Strauss of the University of New Hampshire's Family Research Laboratory has said that national surveys and other studies have shown equal rates of violence by men and women since as early as 1984. But this evidence is typically ignored, concealed, and often explicitly denied by the academic community. More recently, CDC's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control, in conjunction with the National Institute of Justice and the Department of Defense, launched the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey. Now, this was touted as a landmark study that would gauge the status of domestic violence in the United States. Guess what they found? They found that 53% of the victims of interpersonal violence in the U.S. were men. Let me say that again. They found that 53% of the victims of domestic violence were men. They also found that over 40% of the victims of severe interpersonal violence were men. Just look at these tables from the NISVS for domestic violence victims in the last 12 months. Table 4.1 is about the women and estimates that 4,741,000 women were victims of domestic violence in the last 12 months. Then look at Table 4.2 that shows the same stats, but for the men. It clearly estimates that 5,365,000 men were victims. Total these two and you get a little over 10 million. 5.3 million is clearly 53%. That makes men the majority of domestic violence victims, and yet all we hear is silence. In fact, to make matters worse, the only place this male majority is mentioned is in the full report. The executive summary doesn't say anything. Glass slipper. The letter to professionals doesn't say anything. Another glass slipper. The fact sheets don't say anything. Yet another glass slipper. In fact, some of these say just the opposite. They claim that women are disproportionately victims of domestic violence. The CDC is clearly telling only half the story. I've written to CDC asking for clarification, and they have yet to respond. You might be asking what happens to all these male victims. Since our domestic violence services are built for women, do men find help and services? The answer is a resounding no. Look at this chart, which shows the number of women and children who used emergency services in shelters, and then the men. Obviously, the men are not finding services when they're in need. According to the research previously noted, men are over half of the victims, and yet they are only about 2/3 of 1% of those who are getting help. Something is terribly wrong here. And what happens to these men when they do seek services? The 2011 research of Douglas and Hines shows us that when men are victims of domestic violence and they go in search of treatment to a domestic violence agency, they run into a buzzsaw. About 80% of the males were told that the services were for women only. 15% reported they were made fun of. 63% were referred to a batterers program with the implication that the help seeker was the batterer. And 95% of the men surveyed felt that the services were biased against men. It's time that we started telling the entire story of domestic violence for both men and women. At this point, men are facing hardship and discrimination that's the result of our legislators being ignorant of half the story and funding discriminatory laws and services that are paid for by our taxes. It's time they heard the rest of the story. Please send the link to this video to your congressman and senator today and ask them just where would they send these men for help. And, as always, keep in mind, men are good.
A campaigner for men's rights, who's been described by some on social media as a woman hater, is standing as an MP in Ashfield. Mike Buchanan says feminists are liars and conspiracy theorists and says the state is sexist against men. He's standing against Gloria De Piero, the Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities in Ashfield, and he's here to tell you more. Mike, welcome. What are these so-called lies that feminists come out with?
Well, we have for about 18 months now been presenting prominent feminists with Lying Feminist of the Month awards. And I had the pleasure this morning of being on ITV's This Morning on the sofa with Caroline Criado Perez, who we've presented 2 awards. Well, the first one was she lied about the impact of more women on corporate boards. And
by that you mean that this claim that women on corporate boards improve profits? You don't think that's true?
Well, it's not that I don't think it is. All the evidence says that that is not so. Well, so we challenged her and she has had no response. All the longitudinal studies that we're aware of show that women do not improve corporate financial performance. It's really clear.
Well, that's interesting because you'll pick your studies and those that are in support of you will pick theirs that actually suggest profitability does increase.
I'm sorry, Fran, it doesn't. Everything that they present studies which show correlation, and correlation is not causation. It's kind of statistics 101. And it's why nobody in the world challenges our assertion which is that women do not improve corporate financial performance. And we have been challenging people for 3 years on this.
Okay. Would you like to keep them out of the boardroom?
Of course not.
So what's your beef?
No, sorry, Fran. That is a shaming tactic. The idea that that I would want to keep women out of the boardroom. Why would you resort to a shaming tactic?
Well, why would you bring up the fact that people are saying that women are an advantage in a boardroom when you're saying they're not? I mean,
but they're not. But the facts say they're not. In fact, 5 longitudinal studies that I presented to inquiries of the House of Commons and House of Lords showed that show international studies show that when you increase the proportion of women on corporate boards, on average, corporate financial performance declines. It's really black and white.
So, Mike, let's talk about your views and your policies without going into longitudinal studies. You believe that in a workplace, men work harder than women?
It's not what I think, Fran. It goes back to a study or a report in 2000 by Dr. Catherine Hackim, a world-renowned sociologist, and she published a paper in 2000 called Preference Theory. And she found in Britain that 4 out of 7 men are work-centred, and work here being paid employment, and only 1 in 7 women is work-centred. Women want balance in their lives.
Why does that suggest that in a workplace a man is working harder than a woman? That simply says that given the choice, a woman would like to look after children more than men, perhaps?
Well, of course.
But why does that mean that women don't work as hard?
Well, if women want to spend more time with their children and with their families, as they do, compared to men, that will necessarily have an impact on their advancement in the workplace. You know, choices have consequences, and women have to realise that if they want to spend more time with their kids and family, which I applaud, there's no reason they shouldn't, but they then cannot expect to be 50% of FTSE 100 directors.
OK, interesting point. Let's go on to one of your policies, which suggests that when awarding custody to men or women, men should have half the time with the children,
yes.
Women should have the other half of the time.
Yes.
How does that fit with 4 out of 7 men being work-centred and 1 out of 7 women?
Well, if you look through that, again, it's one of 20 areas in our manifesto. But the idea is that's a starting point. But
these men, if they're centred on their work, you are assuming that men want to have primary care of children for half of the time.
No, it's a starting point. But the reality is for most men and women with children, that they will come to or could come to an accommodation where the woman spends more time and with the children, and there's no problem with that. So we're perfectly happy with that arrangement. I mean, men and women can come to arrangements, but the point I'd like to make here is that the family court system currently denies fathers access to their children. 95% of parents who don't get to see their children are fathers, and that is emotional abuse of children, fathers and grandparents.
And you'd like to see that redressed?
I'd like to see the emotional abuse of children, fathers and grandparents redressed. Yes, I would, Fran.
And finally, you don't believe that feminists have a cause. You think that it's outdated and redundant. In fact, we are sexist against men.
No,
Just 10 seconds left to make that point.
Of course feminists have a cause, and their cause is female supremacy, and they are driven by misandry, which is the hatred of men.
You've chosen Ashfield to stand in. Why is that?
Because it's one of 3 highly marginal seats, adjacent highly marginal seats near Nottingham. And it's, as you say, Gloria De Piero, Minister for Women and Equalities. And the sheer name, you know, Minister for Women and Equalities, is absurd. There is no minister for men.
So you think there's inequality, but actually men are the victims of it?
Yes, indeed. I mean, our election manifesto shows 20 areas where men and boys are disadvantaged by the state, by the state's inactions, by the state's actions and inactions. And for 5 years now, I've been asking feminists to point me to one area where women and girls are disadvantaged by the state, and in 5 years, not one suggestion has come forward.
Perhaps they would believe that there is a long-standing institutional prejudice. There's been an unlocking, if you like, of the power that they believe men have held, and therefore there doesn't need to be a state prejudice in their favour. This is all about redressing the balance. That's what feminists are after. But you think that they are...
Well, if we're going in for retributive justice, then we should be giving, I guess, black Americans a white slave each.
Let's talk about Nottinghamshire. Let's talk about Ashfield then. Why should the people of Ashfield vote for you? Have you been to Ashfield before?
Yeah, of course.
And so why should they vote for you?
Because we are the only political party in the country, and in fact across the English-speaking world, that fights for the human rights of men and boys. And in particular, I guess our number of the 20 areas in our manifesto, probably the biggest is the denial of fathers access to their children following family breakdowns.
Is this something you have experience of?
Not personal experience, but I know plenty of men who've been denied access. And in fact, our candidate in Broxtowe, Ray Barry, heads up Real Fathers for Justice. And denial of access to children, to fathers, is a major driver of male suicide. And anybody who works in that field has known men kill themselves. But it is also emotional abuse of children who don't see, boys and girls who don't get to see their fathers, of grandparents who don't get to see their beloved grandchildren, and that's one of the reasons we have so many female supporters.
You acknowledge that men are more concerned with working in their lives.
More work-driven, yes.
Work-centred
yes.
than women.
Yes.
And on that basis, you say that, therefore, women don't work as hard. How?
No. I'm saying not
That's
as
what
many
you said
women.
today,
not as
to me
many.
half an hour
Not
ago.
as many women work hard as men. 4 times as many. 4 out of 7.
While they're in the workplace?
Yes, I mean 4 out of 7 British men are work-centred, and only 1 in 7 British women. That has to have consequences for.
What does work-centred mean, though? When it comes to the thing that most gives you pleasure, is that what the question is when it's work-centred?
It's to do with paid employment.
So I'm still not clear. You're saying that women have a desire to be at home more than men?
Yes, it's perfectly
Women have a
biologically
desire
natural.
to look after children more than men? And yet you want men to have custody of children in equal proportion to women?
No, we went through this before. That's a starting point, but I'm saying that in the case of most couples could come to an accommodation where the woman, spends more time with the children, and that is just a natural way. Women are happier to do that, and in fact, study after study shows that although men and women would both prefer to work less hours in paid employment, far more women would prefer to work a lot fewer hours, because they want to spend time with children and family. There's no problem here.
Yes, so in other words, when judges are giving women more time with children than men, I can't see why you're saying that isn't a fair assessment then of the lifestyle and the choices of men and women.
No.
Would men want to be the primary carers of children and go to work and sit in traffic and plan the menus at home and take the children to school and so on?
No, clearly not. But no, our beef is about access to children more than custody. And the reality is that family courts deny fathers access to children. We have supporters who've spent over £100,000 trying to get access to children. Some have succeeded, some have failed. It's a lottery.
OK.
How many men can afford £100,000 to see their children? It is cruel.
Mike, I'm sure we'll talk some more and the voters will make their own minds up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not too long ago, I had it out with a feminist who had come into a male safe space from a feminist blog, just to scoff at the idea of male disposability. She went there and basically said that the entire concept was a myth, that men's lived experiences were completely wrong, and that they were just a bunch of whiners who were complaining over nothing. Yeah. Anyhow, that got me thinking about the concept of male disposability and how that interacts with the feminist movement. Male disposability has been around since the dawn of time. And it's based on one very, very straightforward dynamic. When it comes to the well-being of others, they come first, men come last. This is just the way it has always been. Seats in lifeboats, being rescued from burning buildings, who gets to eat. Really, society places men dead last every time, and society expects men to place themselves dead last every time. Humans have always had a dynamic of women and children first, and that has not changed at all. The 93% workplace death gap has to be evidence of this, if only because there's nobody with any kind of importance or power who's interested in changing it at all. In fact, I remember reading an article in a BC paper not long ago that described the increasing proportion of female injuries on the job as a huge problem. And the insane thing was, the change reflected a decrease in male injuries rather than an increase in female ones. Men's injuries on the job had gone down because the economic downturn had put so many men out of work in the resource sector that there just weren't as many trees or pieces of heavy equipment falling on men as there had been before. And yet, this was framed as a huge problem for women that required immediate action to solve. It's just crazy. It's like if men aren't dying at work at 20 times the rate women are, we must be doing something wrong as a society. Back when we were still living in caves, that attitude was necessary for human survival. Nature's a really harsh mistress, especially when you think of all the animals that never ever get to die of old age. Things were a lot different for humans through most of our history on this planet than they are now. Life was dangerous, human settlements were small, isolated from each other, and one big disaster that took out a lot of women pretty much meant the end of the entire shebang for that group of people. So really, the level of importance that a human settlement placed on the well-being of women and children reflected almost always how successful that settlement was. And that can be expanded to encompass entire societies. I keep hearing from the feminist camp that femaleness has always really been undervalued by society and that maleness is preferred. But I've always contended that it's the exact opposite. The feminine is intrinsically and individually valuable, simply because females are the limiting factor in reproduction of any species. When it comes to producing babies, every woman counts, whereas biologically, one very happy man could probably do the work of hundreds in that regard. So the level of instinctive importance we humans place on the safety and provision of women and their children, it's one of the main reasons why we've been able to be so successful that we've come to really dominate this planet. And while I will concede that this drive to keep women safe from all harm has often resulted in extreme limits being placed on women's mobility, their agency, their power of decision to direct their own lives, all through history in many cultures, and in many cultures even today, I think it's telling that those cultures tend to be the most backward. When you consider the restrictions placed on women in places like Afghanistan, and then you consider that if we bombed them into the Stone Age, it would be progress, I think you can conclude that the most successful societies had a really, really good balance between allowing women freedom and the ability to choose and direct their own paths in life, and the need to protect them and provide for them. However, feminists will insist that these kinds of restrictions being placed on women in those kinds of societies are the ultimate form of objectification. You lock up your possessions to make sure that they will never be lost or stolen or harmed. Honestly, if I were a guy on a battlefield, I might appreciate being objectified in that way. I think if I was going to be an object, I'd rather be a sexual one or somebody's prized possession than an object that can simply be thrown in the trash or smashed into pieces in the service of somebody else's purpose. Feminists also have a very simplistic idea that our willingness to absolve women of their crimes, slap them on the wrist, spare them punishment, it comes from a deep disrespect society has for women's personhood, not seeing them as full human beings, capable of looking after themselves, that we see them as children who don't know any better. And yeah, well, there are parallels there in our desire to protect both women and children from not only their own poor decisions, but the full consequences of their shitty behavior. It's really not as simple as they try to make it out to be. I mean, seriously, even today in 2011, we fully expect that if it comes down to a man and a woman in a burning building and you can only save one, the expectation is that you choose the woman every single time. So honestly, whose humanity are we placing above whose here? We're not talking about going to work. We're not talking about getting an education. We're not talking about having the freedom to decide what you want to be in life. And we're not talking about getting to take Taekwondo. We're talking seats in lifeboats here. The person in the lifeboat is going to survive no matter how capable or incapable they are of managing their own life. And the person going down with the ship is going to die no matter how independent, self-sufficient, and awesome he is. That's the equation. One life more valuable than another. And the woman wins every time. So honestly, is there any argument anywhere that women's humanity has always been held in higher regard by society than men's? To be important to society, a woman merely has to be. A man has to do in order for his life to have any meaning to anyone other than himself. I think it was Man-Woman Myth who said our society reduces men from human beings to human doings. And I really think that's an apt analogy. We measure a man's worthiness to wear the title of man, and therefore the title of human, through how useful he is, either to society or to women. And one of the most useful things a man can do, even now in the eyes of society, is to put women and children before himself. And while I think there's plenty of argument that this attitude is at least partly innate, the way most survival traits are, even collective ones, if it starts in the chromosomes, we really do everything that we can as a society to reinforce this dynamic. Studies have shown that even though baby boys tend to cry and fuss more than baby girls, parents are quicker to attend to or console a baby girl than they are a baby boy. Even just the level of acceptance of infant male circumcision in our culture, when female genital mutilation was banned pretty much the first afternoon we all heard it existed, it really says a lot about the differing expectations we have for males and females. I mean, speaking as a mother, the last thing I would have ever wanted was to hear my child cry, especially when they're at an age when they're completely helpless, completely at the mercy of outside forces, and utterly dependent on the adults in their lives for every last thing. And yet, even knowing how painful that cut is, we expect baby boys, only days old for fuck's sake, to just suck that up. And just think about what even these very first interactions and experiences, these differences in how we nurture our babies, depending on what gender they are, what this teaches them. What do we teach baby girls when we attend to their crying so quickly? We teach them to ask for help because their needs are important. We teach them to let us know when they're afraid or in pain because it's important for us to know when they're sick or in danger or hurt, so we can do something about it. We teach them that when they're sad or lonely, to summon comfort, and comfort will be there. We teach them that they're important. Their needs and well-being, both emotional and physical, are important just because. And what are we teaching baby boys when we leave them to cry? We teach them there's not much point in seeking help because it will be grudgingly given, if at all. We teach them that they should become self-contained in their ability to deal with emotions like fear, helplessness, loneliness, sadness, pain, distress. We teach them stoicism. We teach them to suck it up. We teach them that their fear and their pain are things that are best ignored. We teach them that their emotional and physical well-being are just not as important as other things. I mean, given all of that, is it any wonder it's like pulling teeth to get a man to go to the doctor when he's sick? What we're teaching that baby boy is all the things a man needs to know and feel and believe about himself if he's going to stand in front of a cabin with a rifle while his wife and kids hide inside. We're preparing him for the day he has to fix a bayonet to a rifle and charge a hill under enemy fire. And we're preparing him to make a decision to resign himself to an icy fate while women and children escape in the lifeboats. We are really teaching him to internalize his own disposability. And baby girls, by attending to her crying so quickly, by letting her know she's inherently important to us, we're preparing her for the day she has to think of her own safety first, even if it means the man she loves is left standing alone with a rifle in front of a cabin. We're preparing her to take that seat in the lifeboat. We're training her to not allow guilt or empathy or acknowledgement of a man's humanity or any sense that he might just maybe deserve it more to convince her to give her seat to him, because for millennia, the human species absolutely depended on her feeling 100% entitled to that seat. And that brings me to feminism. You know, the patriarchy smashers, those righteous avengers of equality, dogged dismantlers of every single gender role. What exactly is feminism doing to dismantle this traditional role of the disposable male? Feminism's greatest victories have only reinforced in everyone that society still owes women provision, protection, help, and support just because they're women. In its collective dismissal and abandonment of male victims of domestic violence, it only reinforces in men that it's pointless for them to ask for help because men's needs are of no relevance, and their fear and pain don't mean anything to anyone. Feminism teaches us to put women's needs at the forefront of every single issue, political or social, whether that issue is domestic violence law, sexual assault law, institutional sexism, social safety net, education funding, homeless shelters, government funding for shovel-ready jobs that didn't stay shovel-ready once feminists got wind of them. Everywhere you look, there are feminists pushing their way to the front of the line, demanding women's fair share of all of the goodies, the good stuff, the loot, the booty, the cookies. Even if women don't need it, even if women don't deserve it, and even if somebody else needs it and deserves it more. And they get it, because we give it to them. Feminism has done nothing but exploit this dynamic of the expectation on men to put everybody else before themselves, especially women. Women's safety and support, women's well-being, and women's emotional needs always come first. This is the most stunning piece of society-wide manipulative psychology I think I have ever come across. Feminism has been on the down low with old-school chivalry right from the start, and they might seem like strange bedfellows for sure. But they're not, because both concepts are built on a firm foundation of female self-interest. We made our way as humans through a really harsh history, and we became the dominant force on this planet. And one of the reasons we were so successful is because we have consistently put women's basic needs first, their need for safety, support, and provision. It was in humanity's best interest for women to be essentially self-interested and for men to be essentially self-sacrificing. But we don't need that dynamic anymore. I mean, our species is in no danger of extinction. I mean, we're 7 billion people clogging up the works here. What's the worst that could happen if we all just collectively decided that men were no more disposable than women and women were no more valuable than men? In fact, the greatest danger I see to us right now is that in our desperation to bend over and give women everything they want and everything that they say they need, we've unbalanced society to the point where we're just in danger of seriously toppling over. And really, the only difference I see between the traditional role and the new one for men with respect to disposability is that maleness, manhood, it used to be celebrated, it used to be admired, and it used to be rewarded because it was really fucking necessary and because the personal cost of it to individual men was so incredibly high. But now we still expect men to put women first, and we still expect society to put women first, and we still expect men to not complain about coming in dead last every damn time. But men don't even get our admiration anymore. All they get in return is to hear about what assholes they are. Is it any wonder they're starting to get pissed off? Anyhow, that's not all I have to say about this subject. But it is all I have to say about it today, since my kid is about to walk in the door home from school. So I am going to sign off, and hopefully I will see you all again. For now, I'm Girl Writes What? Ciao.
In every metric that is of vital importance to humans, such as life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, the right to reproduce, the right to raise our offspring, in all of these categories, men fall woefully behind women. It is not even close. Life expectancy in every nation on earth is lower for men than women, usually by as much as a decade. The incarceration rates across the world, and especially in America, hover near 100% male. More than 7 out of every 10 suicide victims we bury are male. We are removing our men from society in an ever-increasing number. We are getting our asses handed to us, and we do not even realize there's a fight going on. We are acting as though everything is normal. We're acting like we are thankful for losing. 96% of work-related deaths are men. Men make up 94% of all combat-related deaths. In America, women can join the military if they want to. They have a choice. Men must sign up for a selective service, meaning if the government wants to send us to war, we have no choice. Men must sign up for the draft at 18 or they face losing their citizenship. And the women who do choose to join the military never have to worry about being called into combat. Men are getting beat in education too. Women have made up the majority of college students over the past decades, and the gender disparity in colleges is increasing every year. Boys are being targeted for mental illnesses and put on drugs in our schools. Boys make up 75% of children on prescribed psychoactive drugs in America. We are drugging our sons by the millions. Millions of infant boys are circumcised every year in America without any anesthesia. Circumcision is genital mutilation. Circumcision is the very definition of genital mutilation. Yet, in America, while it is a federal crime to genitally mutilate a female, it is a common practice to do it to males. It is a choice. We choose to cut the genitalia of our infant sons. Sex crimes, an almost exclusively male-punished crime, is sentenced more harshly than women who murder. On average, a man who is caught with digital pictures on his computer will be sentenced more harshly than a woman who murders her own baby. People wonder why the Catholic priests were able to get away with so much unpunished child molestation, and it was because it was mainly male victims. If it were female victims, we would have stormed the cathedrals with armed SWAT. Male victims of female sexual abuse, especially in positions of abuse of power such as teachers, are said to be lucky. A man such as a teacher who molests young girls are lucky to not be dragged into town square and lynched. Women who molest young boys are handled with kid gloves, and the male victim must hear constantly about how lucky he was to be molested. $20 billion a year is transferred from men to women in the form of what is ironically called child support. That is a larger amount than most giant corporations like Nike, the NFL, McDonald's make in a year. This transfer of money is enforced at the point of a gun. It is a federal and a state crime in every state to fail to pay child support. Tens of thousands of men are locked up every year because they cannot afford to pay child support. We have given the state and our women an incentive to separate us from our children. We are having our children taken from us by force and made to pay money to the state under threat of incarceration for being fathers. Being a father can make you a criminal. Men are vilified, mocked, and beaten for entertainment. I challenge, nay, I dare anyone to watch a week of entertainment and count the amount of times that a non-villain hits the member of the opposite sex or threatens violence. I say non-villain because as a method of proving how evil a character is, doing things like kicking puppies or slapping women is proof of villainy. Now, I guarantee you that you will be hard-pressed to find any evidence of men hitting women, but you will find a disturbing amount of women hitting men. It is not only acceptable in our culture, but it is a form of entertainment and comedy at times. Kind of like how we joke about men in prison dropping the soap, yet cannot even mention female rape without having to trigger warn women for their delicate sensitivities. Oh, if you want to know who is in charge, look at who you cannot mock. Yet, even though men make up the vast number of homicide victims, suicide victims, the homeless, the incarcerated, males make up the vast number of those who die at work, die at war, and die by crime. And even though men make up the vast number of those depicted as evil in the media, boys make up the vast number of genitally mutilated children, and boys make up the vast number of drug children. And even though males die earlier than women, even though we know all of these things, still, the greatest amount of help, services, and support go to women. Instead of having a serious discussion on why we need to stop such a barbaric practice as slicing, or at times biting, the skin off of our sons' genitalia, we are discussing why women are not making more money. How horrendous is it that women who do none of the dangerous low prestige jobs and most often work in very comfortable environments with good benefits want more money? To them, that is an issue that is much more vital than surgically altering our young boys' genitalia. Every study done has shown that each person on earth has a limit on the amount of concern they can show different things. Concern is not an inexhaustible supply. Our tank of concern is actually pretty small. What takes up more concern and attention in one thing takes away concern from another. What we choose to focus on is a good indicator of what we care about. Caring about grown women more than infant boys is very telling. Men are losing. This war was started a long time ago, and we did not even know. Women make up a very small fraction of victims of violent crime, yet we have a national campaign to end violence against women. Due to the Violence Against Women Act, females are a protected class in America. The punishment vetted out by the justice system will mandatorily be more harsh if you assault a woman than if you had assaulted a male. Even though they have protected class status and they make up a very small fraction of the victims of violence, it is still a well-funded and highly talked about subject. It is almost as though women are all that matters, as though women are special and needed to be treated as such. I have never seen a national debate about violence against men. It is almost as though nobody cares about men. And that is because it's true. Nobody cares about men, not even other men. We have all been told since birth that the order of importance is women, then children, then men. Women and children first has been a societal mantra for generations. Treating people with equality by definition means not treating one group as more special than another. Better than. In all surveys, women are happier with life than men. Yet we constantly ignore men and focus all of our resources and attention on women. This needs to change. It is time to start taking care of each other, helping each other. This is a fight, and it is a time that we start working together to win. We need to get medics to those who are wounded, artillery to those who are already in the midst of battle, air support to those that are locked down, rations to those who are in need. This is a fight for our sons. This is a fight for our brothers. This is a fight for our fathers. Men, it is now time to fight back. It is now time for us to stand up for ourselves. It is now time to end this killing of men, this vilification of men, this removing men from their children, this society that cares nothing for men. Let's rise up and be proud, men. It is time. Subscribe to this channel and start the process.
In this segment, we're going to look at some of the ways dangerous women are prepared to trick a man into marrying her. Women who are serious or desperate to find a husband invariably learn about a book that boasts sales of more than 1 million copies. It's called The Rules. If your girlfriend is in possession of this book, watch out. You're possibly what the authors describe as live prey. In fact, the authors also suggest quite strongly that this is a book that should be kept out of sight. This is why, because she may adopt the following tactics. She will never say or show that getting married is on her mind, even when it is. She rarely, if ever, calls you or even returns your calls. She wants you to do all the running to make it look as though she doesn't need you or even want you. She wants you to think of her as a challenge. Then, further down the line, when you've put so much effort into winning her, you'll then be less likely to dump her. She's taught to make sure that whenever you're on the phone together, she will be the person who always ends the conversation. She always wants to leave you hungry for more. She makes a point of not answering your phone to you to create the impression that she's too busy or is in such demand from other men. This might not be at all true, but she wants you to think other men want her. The authors believe that most men will fight harder to win a girl if they think they've got competition. Part of that is about her deliberately appearing to be emotionally cool towards you. She's also encouraged not to show she's jealous or insecure. She's told to never appear needy, even though she might be an extremely needy individual. She's advised to never ask you where you've been or who you've been seeing. This helps her perpetuate the appearance that she's not being that bothered. She always acts as if everything is great, even if it isn't. In fact, she's told to always look and sound happy and upbeat, even if it's an act. She will also act to look as though she's independent, so that you don't feel as though she's expecting you to look after her and care for her, even though that is her objective. She won't agree to see you more than twice a week. She may claim that she's not available, even if she is. She's told that she must never accept an invitation for a weekend date if you ask her after a Wednesday of that week. She doesn't want you to think that she can be called last minute, and she'll say yes. She learns to gently insist that you have to arrange your schedule around her. A girl who's read this book is also told to never have sex with a guy until at least after 3 dates. She's told to dump any guy who doesn't give her expensive romantic presents for her birthday. She's also advised not to live with you or even leave her things at your place. She wants to condition you into thinking that if you want to see her 7 days a week, you have to marry her. If you're in a long-term relationship with a girl who wants to get married, she may claim that she's pregnant. Now, this is sometimes just to see how you respond. I mean, genuine accidents happen, of course. But if it does happen, calmly ask her how she feels about it. When, not if, she asks you how it makes you feel, tell her that you want children only when they're planned. If she pushes you into tell her what she should do about it, if she's pregnant, don't be drawn on that. If she's manipulating you, that is the trap. Politely and considerately say you're prepared to sit down to discuss it properly if or when a pregnancy test proves positive. As if the prevalence of sexually transmitted disease weren't enough, accidental pregnancy is a key reason to always use a condom when having sex with a single woman who may want children when you don't. Particularly unscrupulous and dangerous women will deliberately get themselves pregnant if they suspect that their boyfriend will do the honourable thing and then ask her to marry him. A lot of men do. Now, if any girl exhibits a combination of any of these behaviours, she's almost certainly working on you, so be very careful. The book I've been talking about has been described as an approach to manipulate an unsuspecting man into committing himself to a marriage that he thinks was all his own idea. The authors claim that if you follow their rules, the reader can be rest assured that her husband will treat her like a queen even when he's angry with her because he invested so much time and effort into getting her in the first place. The authors also claim that when women follow their recommendations, their approach has led to countless happy marriages. What they don't share is how many marriages they've helped to start that have resulted in misery for everyone, including any children who were produced by this deceitful scheming. Nor do they say whether such an outcome would be in the best interests of any man who is duped by a woman so desperate to get married that she'd resort to this type of behaviour. The book says, if you're a genuinely nice person, you'll probably feel cruel when you do the rules. You may think that you're making men suffer, but in reality, you're actually doing them a favour. To the authors, playing games is not bad. What seems to say it all to me, though, is how they beseech their readers not to tell their therapist about the book, because the therapist may just believe that such an approach is a manipulative, deceitful and dishonest way to trap a man into marriage. Surely not.